pleasure to present the movie, which is happened to also be a French movie. So I'm very privileged. Thank you, Giacomo.
Yeah, thank you very much, Giacomo. Good evening, everybody. It's nice to see you again, and most of you see you again. Before I introduce the movie, I just thought I'd also sort of hope another event which is coming up next month, which is completely free, and it's this year is the 150th anniversary, I think, anniversary of the birth of Janusz Korczak, the famous Polish educator, and does everybody know who Korczak is? Maybe not. Some of you do, but he famously ran the orphanage in the Warsaw Ghetto. It's a very, very significant figure in the history of Poland and in the history of the Holocaust. A film was made about him in 1990 by Andrzej Wajda, who's probably, in fact, certainly the most famous Polish filmmaker of the second half of the 20th century. It's a beautiful film, and this also, because of the anniversary of Korczak's birth, the Polish government has made it Janusz Korczak year and elevated him to the status of national hero, which is very, very interesting if you know something about the history of Polish-Jewish relationship and even in the post-war period. It's very interesting to see that this year Poland has not only celebrated Korczak as a Polish hero, but also made quite a big deal about commemorations of the first deportations to Treblinka, which also had their 70th anniversary this year. For that anniversary, so the Polish embassy here is organizing a couple of events. On the evening of Thursday the 20th, the university we're showing Korczak, the film, and then the following day there is a talk by an eminent pedagogist who's coming from Australia. She's Polish but based at ANU in Canberra, and she's going to talk specifically about Korczak as an educator, as an early childhood educator. So yeah, you're welcome to either or both of these events, and they're free and open to the public. But perhaps write me an email perhaps if you think you're going to come, and I'll look out for you. Now to today's event, and what I've been asked to do is today show you a third film, and some of you were here to see the first two that we saw a couple of months ago, The Truth and Live and Become. And the common denominator that linked those two was the concept of identity and the concept of disguise, and so the ambiguity between two different identities that often interact, and sometimes one replaces the other times they coexist. Today I want to carry on with that to some extent, but I also want to introduce more to the fore another concept that we skirted on, certainly in the case of the first film, The Truth, and that's the concept of memory, which, as you all know, and I don't need to really explain that, is in itself a concept that's central to identity, both collective and individual. For what forms our identity, if not how we think about our past, how we think we remember who we are and where we come from. So the two concepts are indeed sort of very, very easily reconcilable, and they're part of the same idea. So for that reason, I wanted to show you a film that also I think nobody will have seen, because it's a very rare film that was made in 1999. It's called Voyages, and I think it's a little gem actually that I'm just pleased to show you, whether we have whether it falls within an academic framework or not. Tonight it really doesn't matter. I just want to show you the film, but it does happen to fall within an academic framework because that's sort of what I work on. And what I'm doing, what I'm planning to do in the near future is give a little bit more thought to a new concept that a couple of British scholars have been working on, which is the idea of concentrationary cinema. It's not a very catchy headline, but it's very interesting. And the idea that Pollock and Silverman, Leeds-based academics, have approached in the last couple of years, particularly in relation to the documentary Night and Fog, Nuit et Brouillard by Alain Resnais, which I suspect many of you know. It's a very, very famous 30-minute documentary made in 1956. It's the idea that you can use film to, or that filmmakers have approached what the French philosopher Rousseff in 1947 termed the univers concentrationnaire, the concentrational universe. So the idea that the lager, the concentration camp, was an alternative universe where the normal rules of behavior and sociology and society were completely overturned. And I would, so they have applied that concept to the film Night and Fog, and it made me think whether, so made me wonder whether that could be explored further and whether Holocaust film more generally could fit in there. And actually, one easy answer to give straight away is that if you think, cast your mind back to the corpus of Holocaust cinema that you've seen in your lives, and I'm sure you've all seen many Holocaust films. One thing that does lack, one thing that is consistently absent, is the concept of concentration universe. So the concept of the lager as an alternative world. Partly that is because when we concentrate on the lager itself, we tend to do so by individualizing history and focusing on one person, which makes perfect sense. But it is important because it gives a face to the 6 million. But at the same time, often sort of makes us lose the collective focus of the Shoah as an historical event, as a genocide. So what I'm doing at the moment is sort of boiling down, particularly using Holocaust memoirs, boiling down the Shoah itself to what it actually is. So stripping it of all the things at the edge. And again, if you think back to the films that you've seen, you might have come across reviews and critiques where either the filmmaker, to defend himself or herself, or the reviewer say, well, it's not really a Holocaust film. It's not really about the Holocaust. It's a Holocaust film, but it's not really about the Holocaust. So if you think about, I'll give you some obvious examples. If you think about Life is Beautiful, it's not really about the Holocaust. Chill out. It's a film about the father-son relationship. If you think about Schindler's List, many Jewish academics have critiqued it very seriously, very gravely, by saying, well, it's not really about the Holocaust. It's a story of, at the margins of the Holocaust. And really, it's a story about one German businessman and his catharsis. So, with every Holocaust film that's ever made, pretty much, as an historian I should never say with every film, but with most films, I would say with the vast majority, there is a difficulty, I think, whether deliberate or not, to really grasp what the Shoah is about, particularly the genocidal policy itself, particularly the concentration camp experience, but also what it actually means to Jewishness as a whole, what it meant at the time and what it means afterwards. So I've focused, but made a synthesis of all this and focused my future work on three main concepts that follow both the experience of the camp itself and the immediate aftermath and the longer term aftermath. And these three are meaning, mourning, and memory. The idea being that the experience of the camp is when you read the memoirs is about the physical experience, but it's also about the psychological, cultural attempt to understand, and specifically in almost all memoirs about the impossibility of that understanding, and also of the absolute sort of emergency necessity that you don't try to understand while you're in the camp itself. Primo Levi expresses it beautifully in If This Is a Man, when he talks about the encounter with a French inmate who had carved at the bottom of his bowl sort of meal bowl, the words "ne pas chercher à comprendre," do not try to understand. So at the end of each meal, he would see these words and remind himself that he shouldn't try and do that because he would go crazy otherwise. Interestingly, it's connected to the meal because the seconds after that terrible meal are probably the only moments in the day of a camp inmate where the sort of soupy, watery soup gave you the impression of being satiated, of being full, and you then have the sort of presence of mind to be able to think about something else, such as why am I here, where are my relatives, and so on. So it's at that moment that you mustn't try to think about it, because that's the only moment when you could actually potentially afford to think about it. So I ask, how has cinema ever tried to approach that aspect of the essence of the concentration camp experience? Similarly, when the doors of the camps are opened, memoirs time and time again come back to the idea that the doors open and the lager it ends in a sense, but their experience doesn't end. In some cases, it begins at that point. Time and time again. Spielmann writes it at the very last page of his memoir. He's free. He's back in Warsaw. For him, being a Pole, it's not even yet. He's never moved from Poland during the war. He's free again, and he looks at himself on the mirror and says, "Well, I can't recognize the person in front of him." And he says something quite rhetorical, like the skies are still leaden, and nothing will ever be the same. It's very, very tragic ending. And the moment of liberation for him is the moment when he, for the first time perhaps, focuses on what's happened to everybody else. Levy talks in similar terms about the Russians arriving in the camp, and time again, you have memoirs that make the moment of liberation coincide with the first sort of feelings of mourning, which, as you know, are fundamental not just to Jewish culture, but perhaps specifically in this case to Jewish culture. So the moment of liberation is joy, but it's also the realization of a loss that is immeasurable. So again, how do films deal with that particular aspect, which is crucial to the understanding, particularly if you want to reject the rather trite idea that, 27th of January 1945, the Russians arrive in Auschwitz and the Holocaust is over, which is just not true. The answer to that, I suspect, is that films have struggled, and partly because, especially modern films from the 70s onwards, have so focused on survival as a cathartic aspect of storytelling, that they haven't had the courage, the guts, in my view, to give audiences that ambiguity between survival and mourning and loss. And finally, the third aspect is the sort of more longer term, again, still with the idea that the way of thinking about the Holocaust, especially these days, especially since 2001, say, and the institutionalization of Holocaust commemoration with the UN Holocaust Memorial Day on the 27th of January, I would say it has led to a perception of the Holocaust as something that is past, which it indeed is, but it's sort of finished and we can sort of move on. And I think the idea of closure is very, very tricky for something like the Shoah. And at the same time, though, it's also the moment, the last 10 years, when quite a few third-generation filmmakers have begun to make films about memory, which are really about memory. They're about the Shoah, but they're about the memory of the Shoah, and in their case, they're about the post-memory of the Shoah. So these are filmmakers in the third generation who, like many others who are not filmmakers, have a memory of an event they were never part of. And that memory is just passed down. So we don't call it memory, we call it post-memory. But I think in my view, it is central to it is still central to the Shoah itself, to understanding the Shoah in a sociological sense and in a cultural sense, rather than in a strictly historical sense. So the film I want to show you today, I think, is a superb example of this attention to memory as an integral aspect of the history of the Shoah. And it was made in 1999 by a Parisian filmmaker called Emmanuel Finkiel. And what you will see is entirely acted by amateur actors. And my greatest regret today is that I cannot show you the sister film of this film, which is called Casting, or Casting, which is the actual footage of the interviews through which Finkiel and his assistant filmmakers selected these elderly Eastern European Parisian emigres, who's Yiddish speaking, and selected them for his film. In any case, what you will see is the result of that casting process. So they're all non-professional actors, and the story follows. It's really made up of 3 independent episodes, and because of time today, we'll only see 2 of those episodes. And we'll see one, then we'll have a break, and then we'll see the other, and we'll probably have time for a conversation afterwards this way as well. So the first episode is in Warsaw and follows this group of elderly French Jews of Eastern European origins going to Auschwitz. In some cases, going back to Auschwitz to visit as tourists, effectively. The second episode is based in Paris and follows the story of a woman who receives a letter from a Lithuanian man who claims to be a long-lost father. And that's the episode that we won't see, and what happens in that episode is that she finds out that he's not, that there's been a mistake. They have the same surname, but he's not her father. But at the same time that she realizes that, she also decides that after all, she doesn't have a father, she has never had a father. He died in the Holocaust. He hasn't had a family, he lost them all in the Holocaust. There's no harm in adopting each other, basically. And then the third episode, which you will see, is set in Tel Aviv, in Israel, and follows a very elderly Russian immigrant who's just arrived, who's just done Aliyah, and is a little bit lost, I suppose, in Eretz Israel, and she's looking for a cousin that she hasn't seen for 28 years. And these 3 episodes are independent, and yet they are related. There is a correlation that is made explicit at the end of the film, but they're also related, I think, in terms of the themes that they explore. And I encourage you particularly to think about them in terms of how they approach the issue of memory in a way that is not always explicit, but that is nevertheless very, very, very significant. So if that's okay, I'll start it now. It's 7 o'clock, and then we'll pause at about 10 to 8, and then we'll come back. Sorry, I can only say it was perhaps more frustrating for me than for you. Having promised you a little gem, you got a sort of strange sort of, half a mute film, half a silent film, and half a Tel Aviv city centre. I don't know what it was. We couldn't find out. I hope it didn't spoil it too much. Thankfully, the subtitles were there. If you are willing to have a conversation about the film, there may be things that jumped out at you that you want to discuss. Otherwise, I'll start us off. But perhaps there's somebody wants.
Can I just ask?
Yeah.
Were you saying that all that time in Tel Aviv, when all we could hear is the background noise, it wasn't meant to be that way?
No, the background noise plays an important part, but sometimes they were speaking and we couldn't hear their dialogue.
I thought it was...
You could read the subtitles, but...
I was making sense of it. It's like, poor woman, she can't hear a thing.
Oh,
anybody's saying, So I was very sensitive, very clever, I thought it was.
That's a lovely, pragmatic and very Jewish way of thinking. But yeah, I'm afraid you were meant to hear, at least quietly, but I don't know what it was. Anyway, it happens with technology. But, Did they feel connected? Did you see things stand? That they were consistent throughout the two, at least the two episodes that you saw, in terms of topics that come up.
It's always the same like background. Sorry if I interrupted someone.
No.
It's like the story of people who try to collect pieces of their lives and to put them together, and they have to travel for that. So that's why probably the title of the book.
Yes.
But yeah, it's interesting. I've never realized that there were people who have something, huge part of their lives taken away, and they had to go and get it. And most of the time, they were looking for years and years for someone, for a name, for something in vain. In this case, I'm not even sure. I hope it's true, but I'm not sure. It could be a misunderstanding. We're not even sure she is the cousin. Because at the end, she's talking. We're not sure she is the cousin. She's her cousin. Because she talks.
No, with Rivka, but in the old people, they're meant to be cousins.
Because
it's
she talks about her husband.
Yeah.
She says, "No, why are you asking that?"
Yeah.
And because that's something she was supposed to know, and if she doesn't know, maybe she's another person.
Maybe they know.
So it's you never know. It's like then that's the connection with the second one that you summarized. We haven't seen that. Maybe it's just good enough to pretend we found the person.
Yeah, so in this case she leaves, and of course the ending almost leaves you wondering whether Vera, the Russian lady, was ever there at all.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting that having...
It had not occurred to me.
No, but I think she was, but it's interesting that I think symbolically, narratively she was there, it's fine, we didn't dream her, but symbolically maybe she wasn't. I mean, she does this important role in the film, Vera, of bringing the two stories from the first two films together, because she meets Rivka, and then Rivka receives this phone call from Granik, from somebody searching on Granik's behalf, and we can probably assume that Mr. Granik settles in Paris with the wrong daughter, and Rivka, the real daughter, never gets to find out what's this big absence in her life. But regardless of that, the plot is sort of irrelevant in this film, actually. And it's interesting that having performed that role, Vera disappears. Like, she doesn't catch the first bus. Does she catch the second one? Why the second one, not the first? Maybe she was never there. But either way, like at a symbolic, in terms of evocative level, it's almost though once you've tied up the loose ends, you can turn back and think about those who the film cannot speak for because they didn't survive. So again, like you were saying, Benoit, it's like the thing that sits in all three, certainly in the two you've seen, is this idea of absence, that they're all looking for something, and the film ends on an absence when it goes back to these seats, and you expect Vera there, because of course I don't know if I speak for everybody. Certainly, my old romantic self. I love a happy ending. I was hoping Rivka would walk out and say, Vera, come in, stay with us. I mean, it happened in the second episode, why not in the third?
You're in
But, sorry?
You're in Israel.
Yeah, well, and then the story of Vera, who has to keep moving, until she can't settle down. She doesn't seem to be able to just stop. She stops for a moment on that sofa, but has
seems
to
to
keep
be
going.
a sort of sense of disappointment, and you see that in the first movie as well, with the people in the bus always complaining, why am I here?
Yes,
I mean, they've come to seek something, but when they get there, there's nothing for them.
because the physical voyage is not the voyage they need to undertake. And
I've lost something, they need to get it
they
back.
can't get it.
So
It's nowhere.
there's no connection. She didn't think of her cousin in the office home. The cousin moved on and was happy with her day-to-day life and put aside the ghosts, and Vera's ghosts continued and Rivka's ghosts continued.
And in Rivka's case, the same way, the voyage is pointless because she insisted with her husband, let's go to Auschwitz, But once they get to Auschwitz, she stays in the bus. So it's not the physical trip that she needs. And I think that's so important, I think, for the way we commemorate the Holocaust today. It's so site-centered. You know, we're so much about the place. Whereas, you know, if you...
Since the bus hadn't broken down, they wouldn't have had all that conversation. And they were determined to get to the destination.
But I think they had those conversations. I mean, Rivka and her husband had those conversations all the time, how they go connect.
Although they're still together at the end.
Just go on and on, you know.
And then they're back in Israel together. I thought, what is that, you know?
But again, that's another... Sorry, just to finish the point I was making, it's like we're site-centered, but actually, you know, Auschwitz is, you know, a collection of lots of different camps, and yet the tourists, you know, get taken on a trail, and everything that's around is equally a site of genocide. So much so that the young man who didn't want to go there, who doesn't really care, the Poles have never done anything to him, he's the one who first connects really with the land by accidentally stumbling across the tracks.
Some people experience real grief because a woman sobbing on her husband's shoulder.
Of course.
For some people it was cathartic, but not for Rivka.
But the film, interestingly, I think I like this part, is that it doesn't focus on the catharsis. It doesn't allow the audience to focus on the catharsis. So some people have this sort of, and I think, you know, very, very representative, very common release of emotion, which is sad but also cathartic. But the film leaves them in the background and focuses on those who cannot achieve that catharsis. And again, you know, we live in a world, in a culture where the remembrance of the Holocaust is you know, consistently about closure, and it's very seldom that you get somebody who has who has the vision and the courage, because of course nobody saw this film, to not offer you that closure. You know? So I'm sure I know that they thought about having Vera stay with Rivka at the end. It must have been very tempting, but they decided not to. There was something else that you said that I think points to another sort of thread that links all these, which is the tension between daily life and this thing, this absence, this memory, you know? The past, present and past of daily life and recollection, which is really interesting. Again, in all three, you see it's constantly there. I think partly that's why the background noise is so important in this film, no? So.
But you see the especially Rivka and Vera, you see them walking along or sitting down or whatever they're doing, you see that their minds are full of their memories. You can see that they're completely absorbed. But you never get to hear, usually in these films, you get to see the memory. You get to see the reenactment of this, that, ever dreadful thing that happened to them. But you just see the women. And even though like nothing much was happening a lot of the time, it was amazingly gripping. The conversations they had on the bus, the personalities that emerged from some of these quite dreadful people, and you know, and lovely people, but a mix of people.
Yeah.
Nothing much happens, but you get to really have a feel for who they are, and I really enjoyed it. I'm surprised how absorbing it was.
Again, I really like the fact that it doesn't give us the solace of the flashback, because flashback is such a sort of, you know, it can be terribly moving and terribly dramatic, but it gives you some sort of relief. You know, you can fill in the gaps. The absence, and this really cumbersome absence, is an oxymoron, but it works, and it's much worse than seeing what it is they're trying to remember. And again, something that completely flies in the face of the template of Holocaust film, which is quite different. So to go back to what I was saying at the beginning, so in many cases with recognized Holocaust films, people end up saying, for one reason or another, well, it's not really about the Holocaust. I think in this case, it's one of these films that's not necessarily recognized as a Holocaust film, but actually, I think it's more about it than lots of other films that maybe are set in a concentration camp or on the outskirts of their own.
My mother was in the Holocaust and never recovered. So So when she talked about her family, it was not about us, like my brother, but her and her family, and it was so familiar to me. It's also just reminded, there's some people, the man on the bus who said it's all coming, another bus is coming, that these were all Holocaust survivors. Some had made the transition to leading a quote normal happy life, and other people could never do it. Griffith couldn't do it, my mother was a Chris, she couldn't do it, and Vera couldn't do it.
And the truth is, most people can do it at times, and that's why daily life is so important here, because of course the Holocaust ends and we move on. That, of course we do. But at the same time we never do. And that's why I think that the tension here between these, in all three episodes, the women have photographs that they carry, they really cherish, and they're sort of hanging on as though they're the real person. And right at the very end they come back when the camera pans from Rivka's gone to answer the phone to the bus stop, and as it pans, it has all these pictures on the wall, and throughout, even in the second episode, photographs play an important part. So we carry on. Daily life forces us to carry on, but at the same time, we don't really. So and there's a tension there.
That's only one way of dealing with the memories. My family, my father buried it all and wouldn't talk about it.
He wasn't in Europe, though, was he?
He left Poland in early 39.
He wasn't there during the war.
Not during the war, but his family was still there and lost all that. But and there's various ways that people learn to manage it.
Of course, that's right. And you see the various ways here, because the horrible man, Rivka's husband, that you despise as much as she does, he also carries that. It's just that he hides it in an aggressive way, but he also carries it. It doesn't mean that he's nice to his wife, but that he's a complex character.
Yeah.
And there's a really nice. When historians have been studying memory for a long time, it's a hard thing for us to do. Probably for about 30 years, which in terms of the discipline is very recent, actually. It's a hard thing to do because it doesn't give you anything tangible to say, right, that's evidence, But increasingly, people are studying memory and forgetfulness together. And there's a really nice image that the French scholar uses to explain the field, where only a Frenchman could come up with this, excuse me very well, but it's a lovely romantic image of this sort of coastline where what you see, the coast, is memory, so what we remember explicitly. And what you don't see, the sea, is forgetfulness, what we've forgotten, whether it's deliberately or otherwise. And he describes the surf and that sort of narrow strip of sea, which is shallow enough for you to see the bottom, as silence, and as a sort of middle ground between forgetting and remembering. And it's quite a nice image. You can stretch it quite a long way, because of course the surf constantly erodes what we remember and takes some things away, but also dredges up other things that come back from the depths. It works quite well, I think. And here you have both. You have memory, you have forgetfulness. You also have a sort of prosthetic memory, which comes out quite interestingly at the beginning when they're driving by the Warsaw Ghetto Memorial, and one of the men says, "Oh, interesting! It's not as I expected or imagined it."
I imagined it very different.
So I imagined it very differently. That's it. And so how we create memories and images for what we haven't seen, and I suspect a large part of what we think we remember is some things we do remember, of course. There are facts we remember. But we contextualize those facts in our memories. So I think this is a rare example of how that complexity is engaged with. What else? There's a lot of atmosphere here. And has anyone seen Three Colors by Krzysztof Kieslowski? White, blue, and red. Yeah, Finkel worked as the assistant director to Kieslowski on those three films. And you can tell this sort of, this over-reliance on, well, not over-reliance, but sort of heavy reliance on atmosphere, and very little reliance on plot. That it doesn't really matter. Again, it's something quite unusual, quite refreshing, I find.
Was it the script written before? Or
the script is written, but then it's given to these non-professional actors who I don't know how you felt, but really bring it to life.
In the first film, I felt the atmosphere was amazing.
On the bus.
Setting the scenes, the trip, and the actors were, let's say, not as strong, you know, in their performance as the settings. But the other thing that came to my mind I just mentioned is how the buses became their own. The bus became its own lager.
Yeah.
Well, in its way, the way people were relating to each other and talking. I'm not saying as intensive as a.
No, I understand.
But,
no, there is
but its own subculture.
Yeah, there's
Even
a moment
to the
when
point
they
of when they passed.
side by side.
Yeah, that was
And
very powerful.
one says, there are empty seats, let's go there. Says, no, I came with the group, I'm staying with the group. There's something quite chilling about that.
Yes.
Yeah, when you know the history of deportations and how they were, you know.
And the whole sense of those who were in the bus that could run, they were the survivors, they were left behind.
Yes.
You know, there was this whole,
it's
very powerful
it is
imagery.
powerful. It is powerful. It's very powerful. And I mean, I love that again, you know, memory is a difficult thing to represent. Some of you may have seen Everything is Illuminated, which is again all about the generation memory. But there's that image with the coming across the tracks by urinating on them and uncovering them by mistake. And then it's immediately followed by when the man is called and he turns around and he steps in a frozen puddle and leaves a footprint. And the footprint is the same as the track. You know, it's something that you leave on the land and then somebody else finds it and wonders what it is. So he's just come across, it just reinforces what has just happened, just in case you've missed it or thought it was a normal track. It tells you, by showing you that footprint, that there's something more significant going on here. And it's interesting that the young man has to make his own connection. He cannot just borrow his father's connection. They argue at the beginning. I don't know if you know this.
Paul's never did it wrong.
Yes.
I just want to say, because having observed lots of Holocaust survivors for my mother, for one thing, Rivka, in a sense, she would say that if she had children, then she could leave the site of ghosts, perhaps focus on children. She didn't have any children. That was a tragedy. But the man of us with the son, and my mother, by the way, it wasn't like this, but when I was in Israel, we stayed with some people, and her father, with the family, with children, and the wife sort of said that her father used to cry all the time about Holocaust, but she said, well, you live in Israel, you've got me, you've got your beautiful grandchildren, he said, but I haven't got my family. Some people, although that man of us had a son, he didn't really connect with his son. He was still, his ghost was still, you know,
But the son discovers a connection with his father when he discovers
he
the
does,
real
yes, but up till that point,
and that's
the son,
the
the father's son,
scratching.
He's got to scratch
It's
his
like
face.
stretching the memory because literally the family, I don't want to but in documentaries I watched, they were saying that the survivors weren't communicated at all with their families, so the family had to literally look for and insist on getting pieces of information from the grandparents, or because it was hard to get these things.
Yes.
Because it's hard to touch.
At the beginning of Landsman's film, Shoah, you know, the 9-hour documentary, I don't know how many of you have actually, you know, managed to see through it. It's quite a feat. But at the very beginning of it, this is all nicely set up, actually. He starts at Chelmno, the death camp at Chelmno, and because chronologically it fits Landsman's point, and he starts from the only two men who survived Chelmno, Simon Srebnik and Michael Podlechnik, I think, who one lives, I think both live in Israel. But Simon Srebnik agrees to go back to Chelmno with Landsman and stand in the field with there's nothing there, and recount what happened in that field with nothing there. Podlechnik instead doesn't want to move. He stays in Israel. They talk, and Landsman films that interview, which lasts 10 minutes, because Podlechnik just says, "I don't want to remember." He has this fixed smile, and he does it, and you can tell exactly what's going on behind that smile. Well, not exactly, but you can tell that something tragic is going on behind that smile. But he doesn't talk. And Srebnik wants to relive it puts everything north. And so you get that, it's what you were talking about, the different ways of dealing with it. But in the end, you know, everybody deals with it in a different way, but it's present for everybody, and it's powerful. But again, I like, as usual, everything is in Landsman's film. Whatever you find somewhere else, you can find somewhere in Landsman's film. I really like this idea that I know I said it already, but it's worth reiterating that we need to scratch for the memory. You know, we need to scratch the surface. That it's not enough to sort of absorb what we're given pre-packaged as something that, you know, somebody's telling us institutionally. You know, we need to remember. They don't tell us what we need to remember. We just need to remember, and then they tell us where to remember and when to remember. So you remember at Auschwitz on the 27th of January, or maybe if you're Jewish, you remember whenever you want on Yom HaShoah or at Yad Vashem. But you know, but otherwise, institutionally, that's sort of, you know, quite forced, I think. And yet, there are moments of real connection which really happen when you go beyond that. Yeah, there's lots of quite good examples of that. There's a film called KZ that came out of the film festival a few years ago, and it's all about Mauthausen and how it's been turned into a very lucrative sort of tourism destination. And then at the end, and it goes through with the groups who sort of go through this quite polished, heavily reconstructed camp, and then the last minute, the filmmaker moves into a field next to the camp. That's where Mauthausen sort of grew into, when in the last months of the war, when all the surviving Jews from the East were transferred there, and that's when most of the killing happened at Mauthausen. And yet in this field there's nothing, it's just grass. But it's as much as, in fact, it's more of a site of extermination than the main camp where everybody goes to remember. Obviously, you know, we can't just walk around you know, the fields wondering, oh, is this where it happened? But it is where it happened. You know, Treblinka, there's nothing left. Chelmno, there's nothing left. Sobibor, there's nothing left. Auschwitz, there's a lot left. Quite a lot of it is post-war reconstruction. Quite a lot of it has been sort of hijacked by different lobbies within Poland. So there, you know, I think there is a point to finding alternative ways of connecting with the past, whether we've lived that past or whether we're sharing in our ancestors' memories.
It's interesting you were saying about the field, because when I went to Poland 6 years ago, some of the most powerful experiences I had were out in fields with nothing around, or in forests with nothing around, and just hearing the stories of, you know, people being killed en masse and that sort of stuff.
That's right.
So, you know.
Yes, I mean, I've never had the guts to go to Poland. I go to Yad Vashem quite happily.
Yeah.
But that's my place. But you know, I don't want to go to Poland. Nothing against Poles, you know. I'm quite happily showing the film for the Polish ambassador, but it's just not my place. You know, I mean, obviously not my place, but it's just something about it. But that's neither here nor there. There's a scene at the beginning of the first episode where they're on the bus driving through Warsaw, and they've just seen the monument, and then the camera turns to a park, where these families are playing, and the families are innocent, they've done nothing wrong. The park is lovely, and yet that scene I find as chilling as some of the later ones, because you know that park is where the ghetto used to be, and again, life has to go on, but it's that sort of moment where memory and, you know, remembrance and forgetfulness just clash. In that case, I think quite violently, even though nothing violent is happening. I see you've stood up, so it's time. I think it's time. Yeah.
Everyone, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you.
This is the last time that we'll present in this season of Ora Torah. We can go ahead and less, and this was an impromptu session because Gila was busy today. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.